So start all over again? Okay. Next month, we will be hearing from the school system's community listening sessions about how to rezone possibly our school districts. And that should be a pretty lively and interesting follow-up on what's happening so far in that effort. And it's one that I think a lot of us have had a desire to see things change and happen for a long time. So it'll be good to hear what community is saying at this point. We are glad you're here today, particularly. I think given the flurry of change on the federal level and some of the ways in which there's a certain amount of whiplash for all of us, it's really good for us to refocus on what we can do in our own community to make life better for this community we love and the people that live here. We know there are a lot of troubling indicators, whether we're talking about school outcomes or employment figures or the lack of affordable housing or many other kinds of concerns in our community. And over the years, there have been a variety of attempts to pull together the amazing array of nonprofit and public resources that we have in this community to try to address some of those concerns. We had Smart Start, we had Forsyth Promise. We've had different times of trying to say, how can these agencies work together more closely? What you're going to hear about today is a more recent effort over the last year and a half or so called Thriving Together, which is an attempt to break down those silos, to really have a long-range, sustainable way of pulling our resources together. And I love the tagline for this effort, which is all people, all families and children, thriving well, no exceptions. And that's what we'd like to see happening in this community now. So I'm really glad to introduce today Lori Fuller. Lori came here to graduate from Wake Forest University. After that, she got a master's in social work at Chapel Hill and then an MBA back at Wake Forest. And as she said, I've been in this community forever. And so wherever I go, I run into people. She then worked for 20 years at Kate B. Reynolds as one of their program folks. And now she's doing a variety of consulting with agencies trying to say, how do we work together more closely? She's been an integral part in helping these varieties of agencies and organizations kind of revision what they do, rethink how they connect, rethink how you use resources collectively in a more efficient and effective way. And also, I think, helping us think, how do we really hear from the people most affected by these works? How do you build this both from the bottom up while still knowing we have to access the powers that be? So Lori's got a wealth of information to share with us. And toward the end of her part of the presentation, she's going to pull up a couple of partners so they can tell you how their work is being affected by this new attempt. So Lori, we are glad to have you today and welcome you.
Here this couple of weeks ago. I am excited to be here. Yes, thank you. Sorry to do this. Also think about everything at one time, which I'm not really good at. So I'm also relieved to be here because thinking about sharing this local work, I was like, oh my gosh, I know if I was thinking along the same line as Dean, then it was good. That in thinking about how to present and share local work with you all, it was one thing I could accomplish, that I could control, that I could achieve and deliver on. And in the past weeks of chaos and injustice, I needed that more than ever. So thank you for the invite. It turned out to be right on time. Another thing I've been doing is remembering to string. You know, God gave me stringing some things I cannot control. That's usually the one I have the hardest time with. But I've also been reflecting on, I came here in the 90s, and as a barely 20-something, living on Watown in prodigal prodigals community. Among a group of folks in long-term addiction recovery community and treatment and services. That's where I really learned this reading. And what I try when things are really tough is to remember what I learned in 12-step groups. I learned a lot about life from folks in recovery and 12-step groups. But the one thing I hold on to is at the end of that prayer, just for today. Sometimes it's just for this hour, this minute, but just for today. So for today, I'm going to share with you about breaking down silence. And we've been using that phrase for a long time. We've been saying it, we haven't always been doing it. We've been intending to, we've been trying. I'm going to frame it as us working together different. That's really what it will take to break down silence, is to work together different. As a way of inviting everybody into the work. So I'll tell a story about working together differently and how I started to see it happening here. It was October 2019, in the before times now. Oh, not that long ago. So I show up at Winston-Salem State to hear Nicole Hannah-Jones. And I know some of y'all were a part of making that happen. Thank you. I remember that was the first time I had left the trust that summer. To try to figure out what I was going to do when I was grown up after being there 20 years. And that was the first time I handed out business cards, was at that event. It was also the first time that I met Kelly Easton. It was also the first time that I heard Paul Ford speak when he introduced her. And I am beyond proud and grateful to be working with them. And actually putting in other folks today in a deep way. But what I'm remembering now, as much as what Nicole shared, I remember questions she asked, the statistics she used, and I was thinking about that when I was at the Carver tour that Tricia, our superintendent, was leading just a couple weeks ago at Carver. But what I think is most important now, looking back about that event, is how different it was, how different it felt, how the energy felt different, how diverse that audience was. I'm like, because I do know a lot of folks, and there were a lot of folks I didn't know, and a lot of folks that weren't used to being in rooms together. And folks didn't stand up and walk out when Nicole was telling the truth. And if I say what I mean, the white body folks didn't get up and walk out when Nicole was telling the truth. There's something going on here that I haven't seen. That very next month, November 2019, a lot of us gathered at a packed community meeting on the benefits club. It's like, what is this? We had to stop publicizing it because so many folks saw random advertisements or flyers and signed up. Like, oh my gosh, we're not going to have space for it. Not only that, you couldn't tell which organization owned the event, was leading the event. Yes, it was the Asset Building Coalition, which at that time wasn't even officially a nonprofit. And yes, you knew, okay, there's somebody from Habitat speaking, somebody from GSS speaking, somebody from the Winston-Salem Foundation speaking, but it didn't feel like any groups of it. It really was, in such a powerful way, a community event. And probably most importantly, we had folks with lived experience in the room at the tables. I remember who was at my table. And we literally gave those folks the mic. And they shared their wisdom with the entire group, and we listened. So something different has been going on for a bit. things got a little rocky in 2020 and, you know, the years following that. But then come forward to November 2023, and this is the picture here when many of us gathered as a group to talk about Thriving Together. And that for me is the way that I see us, and I'm wanting to work differently together for better outcomes. So I'll talk about both Thriving Together and the related network Forsyth Family Power. That's the one that's focused on children and families. And I'll share how we're trying to frame this and scaffold it. I use scaffolding, my early childhood educator wife would be proud of me. Scaffold this to so that we make it easier to enable folks to work differently together and to hear from folks from our community who are doing this work. So Thriving Together, it's an emerging network. It's here, but it's not set. It's a network of people and organizations and initiatives that are all wanting to work to create a Forsyth County, just like Dean said, where everyone thrives, no exceptions. And I am so grateful that tagline doesn't have the word equity in it, but it does. But it does, no exceptions. So the vision of this, and that's really what we've been doing, is vision and dreaming and planning while still showing up and working in other networks and doing other work and building other relationships. The vision is all of us working together across sectors, across systems, across different conditions like housing and education, with community leading the way. We want to use shared language. We want to use data to make our outcomes really clear. And we all want to work together towards that all people thriving, no exceptions. So what those of us that are helping to think about this and dream this into existence and build it, we're building a civic infrastructure. Kelly Easton, actually for equity, will talk about that a lot. We're building civic infrastructure. And the idea is, I assume that's still up there because I can't see a thing on the screen. That's a sign that I talked about. Almost. But at least I wasn't sliding you. Oh, it's the HD one. Maybe that was that one. Yeah, probably. So Thriving Together is the civic infrastructure that does this, that aligns and strengthens. Notice it's not building, running, owning, doing it. It aligns and strengthens collaborations and resources to create the conditions for well-being and justice. So yes, it can be about third graders reading, but this is the way we're doing it, is through aligning and strengthening how we're working together in smarter ways, learning collectively, and with that eye on what it takes to put the conditions in place so that people can thrive. So those vital conditions, what are they? This came from the federal government. That was interesting preparing for this. I knew that. So what are the vital conditions for well-being and justice? This came out of a nationwide work group. Many departments of our federal government worked together, brought in other experts. Gary Gunderson is one of our local folks that was on this team. And they mapped out what would it take? What would it take for our communities to recover from COVID long-term in ways that were equitable, that made space for community well-being, and built resilience? Now, what you'll see on the right is often what we think of as urgent services. And usually when I'm talking about Thrive Together, this circle that I use is only a circle of the conditions on the left. And that's where I'm focused. And I know other folks are working on, and we need to work on those urgent services to meet immediate needs. And we need to weave them together. So this is the bigger picture. I saw this, I thought, oh, this is different. There is something special here that any framework I've seen around social change and community-wide social change. And the belonging and civic muscle at the center is part of the magic. And we're living into figuring out what that might look like. We are learning as we go of what would it take to build more belonging and civic muscle to help us all work better together. You know, and one of the things the belonging and civic muscle in the middle does is to help coordinate and weave all of this together so that we can all work towards long-term solutions. That we can face crises, deal with immediate needs, and build those conditions for long-term solutions. So, what is Forsyth Family Power? This represents why I was invited to speak to you all who are most interested and focused on equity in education. So this is also an emerging network. I would say this is not as established, the actual network itself is not as established as Thriving Together is. We haven't had community meetings on this like we have in Thrive Together. We haven't done as much work. However, there's a lot of work going on within the umbrella, within the network of Forsyth Family Power. There's a lot of work going on that is coordinated and collaborative. And that might exist in more sparse pockets that are not connected and thriving together. So these networks are related, they're similar, they're different. And the aim of Forsyth Family Power is to establish a strategic and sustainable, both of those are important and in ways different, strategic and sustainable, if we can actually do it. Not that we haven't had those intentions before. Strategic and sustainable framework that promotes community-wide collaboration, driving impactful changes that ensure those conditions for well-being and justice. And it's specifically for and focused on, although we know that these folks are not separate from the rest of our community, but Forsyth Family Power allows us to concentrate on and focus on what are the particular things that it would take for our children and our youth and our families to thrive. No exceptions. Because there's a lot of things, if we get it right for them, we'll get it right for everybody. And as folks at Aging Forsyth, we talked to them at Senior Services, also made the very strong case. If we get things right for our elders, we'll also get things right for all of us. So that's part of this approach, is to connect this and make it stronger together. For those of you who have been around a while and been in education and community action around education for a while, this represents, in some ways, this is the next iteration of Forsyth Promise. I also want to share about how it's different than what we did. I myself have lived through several of the previous attempts at collective impact. I experienced the frustration, and I want to be very clear. I am accountable. I know I contribute to our elders. Because of that, I am deeply, deeply invested that this is different. That we have to learn, we have to start from learning what we did before. The fact that Dean was at some of these early meetings was a sign to me, oh, this is different. We're looping back and learning from what has happened. Back, and then bringing it forward and keep learning now because it's hard work. So I'm not saying we're getting it right. I'm saying there is a commitment to try very hard and keep learning and stay in relationship with each other and keep figuring this out. So here's one way it's different. We've been talking about backbone organizations for over a decade. Here's one thing that's different. There's 3 of them. It's not sitting in any one organization. It's also not sitting, having worked for a funder for 20 years, it's not sitting with a funder. It's not sitting with somebody that disperses money to folks in the community. That is one thing that makes this particular network different than what we've tried in the past. I'll also say that these 3 organizations, Y'all, they are committed. They are all in. It is on the line. They are their missions, their organizations. They are all in a way I have never seen before. Here's another way that it's different, and I mentioned that we're using those vital condition frameworks. So here's how it looks when we think about it with FFP. We're focused on the vital conditions, plural, that are needed for children to thrive. This is immediately from the framework, from the initial framework that we and folks across the nation were using 10 and 15 years ago. It is immediately more holistic than a cradle to career collaboration focused on education. Yeah. I live with an educator whose family are educators. I am all about, we'll do it this time? Oh. I am all about public education, and much of the work I am doing is around partnering with and working on education. And it is the most active and visible part of a lot of our existing collaborations and work. It's the way a lot of our organizations, including you, frame your focus and your work and your approach to our community. It's also for children, the way that we look at the population level outcomes that show us that kids are thriving. We look at third grade reading, we look at high school graduation, we look at eighth grade math. It's typically education outcomes that we use to see, are our kids thriving, as a one proxy to think about that. So what this framework brings us is this concept of multi-solving across these conditions. We already have a lot of work in the community that's focused on mental health. We Heal Together is focused on behavioral health disparities for our young people in East Winston. We have several groups that are working on safety from violence, including our Opportunity to Love and Heal. So we've got things that, if you map them out, their outcomes, and some of their work, most of their work, is in basic needs for health and safety. It might be how you measure the success of that particular project. And we also have we have programs, College Lift, other things happening in helping kids find those paths after high school to meaningful work and wealth. We've got stuff going on in more than just what you might map as education. And even the education ones aren't all education, because our kids don't just live in our schools. They live in our families and in our neighborhoods, and they interact with healthcare, and they interact with all these other systems. So we have to cut across the horizontal and not just stay in those silos. So yeah, it's education, absolutely. It is equity, absolutely. And it's all the other conditions too. So, I hesitate as we start sharing this. I shared it at the library last week on a strategic feedback session from folks working in community to the school system on their strategic planning process. By the way, the school system has on their website a feedback form to tell them what you think they should start, stop, and continue doing. This is your opportunity, not just to share your voice, because let me be very direct. They know most of their survey participants look like me. They are affluent white women. So whatever you can do to help us get and make pathways for more voices closer to those impacted by our current outcomes is really important. That's one thing that you can do. So this kind of shows up in three different sections. On the left, I want to make sure I get this right. So the reason I hesitate showing this is what we're thinking. This is what we're dreaming. Some of this is together, some of this is ideas, some of this has plans. We are building it and learning and building it. And even when it's launched officially, like this year is basically year one of Forsyth Family Power. Even when it's launched, it won't be set. It won't be determined and this is it and there's no other way. On the left is our intention to organize and support both existing and new groups and efforts. Again, with a commitment to being community-led. And we didn't start with that at the promise. We worked that in later as much of the rest of the nation did on collective impact. But we have the ability now to start with knowing absolutely and being explicit. This has to be led by community. And one for me, I'm also thinking about our collective learning and thriving together. One of our main learning questions is, what will it actually take to move from community voice towards community leadership? Because we're not even close. We're trying and we're moving, and some folks are further along and we need to learn from them. And community voice is a great start, but as community leadership, we need to be getting to. So the middle piece is that backbone infrastructure that those three organizations and others are thinking about, figuring out how to fund, figuring out how to build to support the functions of man. And it's not just
Slow down the back.
okay. You know, this is my baby brother's birthday, and I really feel like he's somehow like had things and like you're talking to him. And then on the right are all of these organizations. I put in one label. I covered up some of the labels on the yellow. We know who some of those folks are. One of them is School Justice Partnership, and I facilitate that one and have been for 4 years. You may hear about My Brother's Keeper and Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Like, we know who some of those folks are. We're working on who else is there and how we weave it together. And we know there's lots of folks here. We intentionally are putting the school system large because they are the system, they are the organization that affects more of our kids, more of the day, more of the days in the year after year. And they are very deep, engaged, committed partners from the beginning. We did not have that across the time of Forsyth Promise. This is different. There's lots of our organizations, not just the school district, that are different, that have different leadership, that are approaching the work, that have learned some hard lessons. But this is one that is fundamentally different, that from the beginning. We have been working with the school district. That, for me, is another primary learning question for Forsyth Family Partnership. What will it take for us, community members, community organizations, community programs, to work well, to partner well with the school district? And conversely, what will it take for the school district to work really well with us? Those are really linear. That's not the way the world works. That's not the way. Logic models drive me nuts. What I was doing at the trust for 20 years was evaluation and learning. They have their place. They're important to understand. Theories of change start to get closer to this, the messiness and what actually happens on those magic, because if you're weaving from the top and the bottom, you've also got to weave in all that messy middle and how it all ties together. We're thinking about this as networks. So this is the way we want it to be. A tightly connected, interconnected, aligned, not focused around one node, around one group, around one organization, but that this work is as complex and interconnected as the solutions that we're bringing forward. So what is a network? I mean, it's a pretty map, and Chuck loves it. He's been using this one for a while. So networks are simply connections of different elements. They're connected to each other. Y'all are a network. You have networks. And the magic of networks is that when they're strong and healthy, they're greater than the sum of their parts. If that wasn't a possibility, we'd be doing this well. We continue doing this work by ourselves and getting our individual impacts and getting the outcome we're currently getting. Because this is not easy. So when a network is healthy, it can do three things. It can achieve its collective purpose while also addressing the interest of its members. That's important. We haven't always paid attention to that. And continuing to adapt to changing circumstances. We've got to do that, and there's now no longer any question about it. So why are we talking about doing it as a network? Because it amplifies. Networks allow us to amplify and spread success. And we're doing a lot of the network weaving, building those intentional relationships, thinking about connection and alignment. That's what that backbone and those folks working around that backbone are doing, are starting to weave together these networks. If you haven't heard of network weaving, it's what I've been paying attention to for the past 5 years. So networks can do a lot of different things, because some of you are like, oh, that sounds really nice, but that's very theoretical. And I can certainly be theoretical and academic. What does it actually do? What can networks do? They don't all do all of these things. Some do some of these things. But networks allow you to do things in different ways, or things that you couldn't do with a single organization. This is why we do it. This is from Collective Mind. That's one of the groups that I go to for things about networks. Another one is Co-Creative. Almost there. So this is how organizations might think about and organize differently. That on the left is a mainstream traditional way of thinking about your organization, and now it's time to collaborate. Who else do I work with to achieve the mission of our organization? Again, that's a start, and that gets us where we are right now. So the idea is that if you are, instead of centering your organization, you're organizing around a shared purpose. So embracing a network mindset means that you're focusing on those connections. And you'll notice there's also a line going around. So it's like everybody's connected in different ways. That's not present on the other one. And it means you stop working in isolation. That's how you break out. If you follow Gary Gunderson's blog post, he came out with one, I think just yesterday, about islands and archipelagos, collections of islands. You can be in an island and doing really great work and feel like you're so isolated and on an island. That's okay if we're collectively building a collection of islands and have folks that are intrepidly sailing over to that island, figuring out what you're learning, what you're doing, how we can do it together, if that makes sense, and coming back and sharing it. So it's okay to do your work in your project and think about how we can be a part of a bigger ecosystem. So this is my last slide. And this kind of gets more to the individual. That was how organizations might show up. This is how you show up. This is how individuals show up. This is what leadership can look like and needs to look, part of it at least needs to look like in network collective impact work. So I hope of these, you see something on there that you're like, oh, I do that. I've been practicing that. Other folks could probably learn from me and my experience about what it takes to do that. And I hope you see at least one other that you're thinking, oh, myself or my group or my organization or my network or my whoever. Ooh, if we learned how to do more of that, if we practice doing that, it might help us accelerate our results. Okay. I took up more than enough of our time. So I'm going to ask our panel members to come up. And Chuck and Paul, y'all can fight over who has the third seat. But I'll ask and Talina to come up. So Valerie and Talina, if you'll come up too. Thanks for your willingness, Chuck. And I will say, Nikita McDaniels, we were hoping would be here. If you don't know about our opportunity, Lemon Hill, check that out. That is an important voice and experience in what's happening. So I'll ask you to each introduce yourself and share what is your work in the community around equity in education.
Hi, I'm Valerie Glass. I'm the director at Triad Restorative Justice. And our mission is to build more restorative communities in general. And specifically with the schools, equity in education, we're looking at how we're helping our school system responding to issues when kids are struggling to, do the appropriate things when they're in difficult situations. So we work a lot with school discipline issues. We also work with the Department of Juvenile Justice with community issues as well, getting referrals to help them kind of take accountability in a restorative way, like making amends and being accountable for the work they've done, but the idea, or for what they've done, the idea of coming out through it in a way of healing and learning versus the punitive approaches that usually actually have worse outcomes for kids after that. And so that's what a lot of the work we do. We also work with schools and other community groups on training the adults and staff to also be restorative and how we can kind of take this mindset and grow it in our community.
Thanks, Valerie. I'm Selena Mayfield, and I'm the executive director and co-founder of the Dream Team Foundation. And our organization works with equity in education through our leadership academy that we have. And that's focusing on leadership, learning, and life skills. And with that comes through transforming lives and helping dreams become a reality for our young people. And what does that look like? Because it's different for everybody. And so it's from a one-on-one approach. So we look, what does the child or the youth or the young adult need? And it's different. And so for me, this is about lived experience. I come from what they would say is one of our local projects. And when people looked at me, they was like, you can't do that. You can't do that because you grew up in a project environment. Well, it's not where you come from. It's about where you're going. So it's through lived experience for me. So I have the passion I have at being one of the young people that grew up at the Boys and Girls Club. And I know what support looks like. And when you have the support, you can do anything. You can accomplish anything with the right support and the right people around you. So I saw at the Boys and Girls Club about bringing those different entities together, breaking down the different systems and barriers that keep you from going and preventing you from being who you're called and chosen to be, and ultimately being an amazing young person in community. So for me, this is personal. So I come from it from a different viewpoint because I grew up in Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools. I grew up in the projects. I grew up at the Boys and Girls Club. So it's what can I do to help another Talina? My name is Talina. So when I see another Talina, how can I help them to thrive and be well in our community?
Amen. I'll follow that. Paul Robeson Ford, Senior Consultant with Action for Equity. Action for Equity, of course, emerged out of the Action for Ashley campaign. And since that campaign that is, still unfinished, but we're close to moving forward to get the new Ashley School built, expanded out to look at educational equitable outcomes across the entire school district in Forsyth County. And in the last year and a half, 2 years, we have in particular relaunched the My Brother's Keeper Network. And I play a day-to-day role facilitating that network, that a collective impact network, part of the larger efforts that we're making. Lori was talking about Thriving Together for Collective Impact Organizing, which is really just about aligning and focusing our efforts, because that's what's going to enable us to build the power that we need to make sure that the policies are in place to support the types of practices that are going to reach as many of the ones that you are talking about as we possibly can, particularly those that have demonstrated the greatest vulnerability to the types of poor outcomes that we're all so concerned about. So that's what I've got my hands on day to day in relation to educational equity.
So I'm going to ask these two together, and we'll see Who wants to step in first? So what have you been doing? How have you been showing up differently? How have you and your groups and organizations been working differently? And are there ways that you've seen others show up differently and working differently? Those kind of signs of these ripples of working differently together.
Yeah, so I've been here for a fraction of the time that many of the folks who have been here for 20, 30, and 40 years old, grown up here have been. But just in the short time that I've been around, it became apparent that this community was operating by plantation politics. And what that really looked like was a lot of decisions being made in the back corners, right, about the things that are going to impact the most vulnerable communities around Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. And what that also has translated to over the years is this sort of silo mentality where, for reasons both good and bad, people have kept their heads down in their corners doing the work that is very similar, sometimes identical, to the 15 other organizations and initiatives that are over in their own corners with their heads down doing the work. Sometimes because people are just so preoccupied and busy. Other times because they had a bad experience with somebody from that 15th organization across town years ago because of interpersonal relationships. They don't want to work with them anymore. And other times because they feel they're going to be competing for the same dollars. And this sort of mentality has really undermined all of our efforts to move the needle forward at the level of systems change, where you start changing outcomes at the kind of mass population level. The good news is that certainly in these past few years, I really do have the sense that there is a momentum and there is a deep desire that is persisted to move out of the silos, to begin to set aside some of those kind of ego and interpersonal relationship issues, to recognize that plantation politics represents the failed methods and politics of the past. And so that circle is growing larger in terms of the people who are coming together saying we want to work together intentionally so that we can improve our impact. And it is becoming harder and harder for the other folks who are hanging back or staying in the corner to continue to kind of have space to do that without being challenged. There are still some folks who are holding on there, but we are pulling them along more and more until we can reach that real critical mass that I've talked about since 2018 to build a pro-equity governing majority in this county, and in partnership with folks around the state who are trying to do the same as a model for what needs to go on at the state and federal level.
From the Dream Team's perspective, one of the things that we've been working on is at our leadership academy, and where our pillars are leadership, learning, and life skills, and empowerment and financial literacy. And we realized that in order for our young people to thrive and to be well and to win, it takes all of us. It's where our name comes from, team. You can't work alone and be an island by yourself and expect to win. It takes everyone, whether that, and for the Dream Team Leadership Academy, we look at whether that, when they come in, whether that be someone from the banking system, from the financial systems, whether that be someone, our partner like the United Way, whether that be someone like a funder of KB Reynolds, whether that be someone that from the school system. We have teachers, tutors, and mentors that are going to help our young people, that are going to pour into them so they can get the grades that they need to thrive and to be well. You also have to look at it from a mental approach. We have, when we bring in licensed therapists to talk to our young people, they have to be healed and be well in their mind before you can even talk about going to school, before you can even talk about math and science and reading. We don't know the traumas that they've faced every day when they've gotten to us. So we want to make sure that they feel loved, that they have the support that they need in order to thrive and to be well. And we can't just look at it, oh, well, we want you to do well in school. We want you to have these great outcomes in school. But where do they live at? How are they living before they get to you in the morning? And so it's making sure that they have food throughout the day. And so it's an entire approach. We want to empower them and to know that they can go anywhere, they can do anything. And so empowerment looks like for us, every Friday in the summer, for 6 weeks, we have our young people. So we take them to places that they've never seen. We empower them to let them know that they can do anything. We bring in community leaders to speak to them. How did you get to where you are today? So we have them to speak into their life, and they can ask questions. They can ask other leaders, how did you do it? Sometimes they look and we always say, when you look at the LeBron James, or they want to be this person in sports, but we want to bring in people from community. Who can they touch and they feel? I love LeBron, but can they touch and they feel LeBron? You know, we love the Michael Jordans. We love those people in sports, and that's great if that's what they aspire to be. So we also bring in entrepreneurs from the community. How did you get to where you are? So it's bringing in every different people and different voices from the community to let our young people know that they can be anything and do anything, and they have the support that they need throughout the summer and throughout the year.
With Triad Restorative Justice, I think we've been blessed to be part of so many good collaborative networks. The things that were mentioned before, school justice partnership, My Brother's Keeper, and we're with Tolina's Dream Team and a group too that has been really great. And so I have a lot of different examples that I'm trying to think of which one to share. But as an executive director, a lot of my thoughts are about funding. Like, I got to make sure that we can continue our program. So we think about funding a lot, and there are some structures that have been built that help with this collaborative atmosphere. So like Talina and I are on a grant with the Kate B. Reynolds that is really set up in a way to be collaborative. We get together and meet and learn about each other's programs. We get to do professional development activities together through all of that. So it's been really helpful. But there's another grant that I received funding for that is very much set up differently. And it is set up to be very competitive. And so there is a set amount of money. The same organizations apply for that same amount of money every single year. It's usually tied to how many people we are serving and the numbers we serve and how successful we are at serving those numbers. And it's a strong atmosphere to be very competitive and very kind of cutthroat. And we've chosen to show up differently in that space. And I think the idea of having like that model where you have this shared goal, we have come in with that approach, and not just to try to restore justice, but some of the other organizations that are part of that network. And we're sharing a similar target audience too. So we're not just competing for funds, but we're also competing for referrals, or it's set up to be that way. And we were, like 2 years ago, really kind of struggling with that. There was one of the referral sources. Department of Juvenile Justice is one of the referral sources. Schools are another referral source for most of these programs. And there's a lot of struggles with this funding source. And so we decided to come together and started meeting on a monthly basis, just the organizations that were receiving that same funding stream on our own, and talked about the challenges of the funding source that we have to deal with, and the grants and the reporting that's needed. And then also started struggling to talk through the struggles with getting the referrals that we needed. Department of Juvenile Justice at that time was very understaffed, and they were in the process of hiring a lot more people. So there was a lot of new juvenile court counselors that were coming on board and just didn't know as much about our organizations. And so we decided collectively, instead of being competitive for this source, we realized that the need out there is so vast that the students who can benefit from the services that we are all providing is numerous, and more than we would all be able to collectively actually impact. And so we didn't need to compete for referrals. There's plenty of students out there. And so we came together and collectively decided, how can we help educate these referral sources about the programs that we have. And so we created a lunch and learn where each of our organizations, we brought in food. The first time we did this, we held this at the courthouse, so it would be easy for court counselors and judges to come in, and we each presented our programs to them. And so we took this kind of a collective approach because we have this shared goal of really we want to reach the students or the youth who need the services, and to make sure that they have a way to access the services that we provide. And it was really helpful too, because we all learned about each other through those processes, through the meetings and then the lunch and learns, that we're now able to recognize when we got a referral that came in that maybe our organization isn't the best for that youth. And there's another organization out there. And so we have now made referrals to each other for situations that we feel like, you know what, this other organization here is going to be a better fit for what you need. And I think that's been a really great collaborative approach with that kind of small team of organizations to show that we don't need to be competitive about things, that there's definitely more than enough for referrals to go around.
I'm struck that having you three up here, and if I think about the initiative, the coalition that Nikita represents too, I mean, you're talking about, especially your example, Valerie, was about networking with other organizations. And Dream Team is talking about like working on the ground with individual kids and kids in their own community. And you know, My Brother's Keeper is thinking about, and Action for Equity is thinking about this macro level of how we knit all of that together. And so that, along with Opportunity to Love, is this coalition of individuals that stepped up and organized and are working in community together on preventing gun violence among our youth. Like, those are 4 different levels, different approaches. Nothing is better than the other. We need them all, and we need them woven together in ways. So I think that's really reflective of, you know, we've struggled with the question of how do you get involved? So what do I do? You know, okay, this sounds great. Now what? And I think this is a good illustration that there's not one path. There's not one on-ramp. And there's lots of stuff that's already started. There's a lot of stuff that you as an individual or as a group organizations are a part of. So it's about how you do that and how you do that deeper, how you do that in greater connection, in collective learning with others. And it may be new pieces and new groups and new starts too. It may be one piece of that kind of shared stewardship. It may be around how we use data. I mean, there's whatever your passion is the way in. And building your own island or deepening the work on your own island and then connecting it to all of the others. So we've got 5 minutes. And I'm like, do I ask for one question of these folks? I tell you what I'm gonna do. If you have a clarifying question, you want clarity on something, we are all available later after this by email. Chuck's always available for coffee, I hear.
Frankie, Thursday morning.
So we can talk about all of those things. What I want to ask, does anybody have a clarifying question? I'm confused about what did you mean? Please clear this up, because that will help everybody. Forrest, yeah.
Yes.
Could you better clarify the relationship between thriving and Forsyth family
Yes and no. Yes and no, both and. What do you think it should be? That is part of what we will figure out in this year, as many of us are working on both of them. And Forsyth Family Power is actually developing structure and coordination and a life of its own. So we're taking what we're learning from, are learning from Thrive Together. And we're literally like right now thinking about, we had work groups last year around Thrive Together. And so now we're building that in circles. We're using sociocracy as a way to build out circles that are interconnected, and thinking about, where does Forsyth Family Power need its own staff, need its own backbone? Where does it use the backbone or staff or visionary panel or family engagement of Thrive Together? You know, where are we one data circle? And that data circle is thinking about Thrive Together data across the conditions. Do we need something separate to think about kids and families 0 to 24? So because of our backbone agencies, and especially Action for Equity being at the heart and center of this, there is a lot of overlap between Thrive Together and Forsyth Family Power. So it won't look like every other condition or every other population focus or every other network that connects in won't necessarily look as closely affiliated with Thriving Together as as Forsyth Family Power is, in large part because right now, Action for Equity is at the center of and driving Forsyth Family Power as they have been driving those ideas and that work for a while. I can't wait to see. So one thing we've talked about is like Thriving Together as being a network of networks. So it's operating at a more macro level. And then Forsyth Family Power is operating at a more meso level, and then even networks, it's not on the ground yet, but more at a micro level. You've got School Justice Partnership and Pre-K Priority and all these groups whose particular goals are lining up to Forsyth Family Power, which is a part of Thrive Together. So that's one way to think about it. We're thinking about where's our connection powerful and where's our overlap getting in the way. That's one thing that we'll really be learning this year.
Just add 2 quick thoughts on that. One of the things to keep in mind, kind of a beg your indulgence as we move through this as a community, is the reality that the culture that I talked about, that for years, generations, has almost by its own kind of subconscious force pushed us into more siloed ways of moving, is one of the things that we're constantly mindful of as we're moving through this process that Lori is describing in circles and everything. Because we've realized that even as we are seeking to move in ways of collective impact and building collective impact circles with intentionality, we have to resist the temptation to do it in siloed ways. Like, I got my collective impact circle over here, you got your collective impact circle over there. No, we need to bring these all together ultimately as a single collective impact circle that over time creates a new culture where we're not even thinking about going over here to do something, but coming to that central place. And so that's part of what we are sorting through and weaving through. I mean, Kelly Hastings, our CEO, would tell you that, she can't wait that the whole design of Forsyth Family Power has been to give it away to the community, so to speak. But I would say it needs to be done in a structured, intentional, aligned way. And so this is what, Lori is helping out with so much. The other thing is to kind of demystify the reality of systems change. The language and the discipline of systems change kind of it encourages us to talk about it as these systems, kind of these fantastic systems that are here. And what I'm always reminding people is systems are made up of people. People operate systems, right? Right now, at the federal government, they're trying to dismantle systems that have served certain interests of equity. There are people who are doing that, who are trying to dismantle systems. And it's people who work for years to build up systems. So it's the people in this community who are going to move in different ways with intentionality that will have the result of building a new system. I don't ever want us to begin to feel like the system has kind of become a thing in and of itself that we don't have any control over. All of the foundations or the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council that is state-run and state-funded, or other reasons, these are run by people, right? Now, there are policies and practices that get put in place over time that begin to feel like their own thing that is making us do certain things. But guess who made the policies and practices to begin with? People. And people can unmake those practices and policies and make new ones. There simply has to be the will to do so.
And I'll close by what you're saying, people. In order for us and our young people to thrive and to be well, it takes all of us in the room. All of us. We all have different passions. We all have different gifts and talents. But in order for us to win collectively and for our young people to win, in order for us to win, it's going to take all of us. So it takes you looking inside and say, what can I bring to the table? What can I be a part of to help us to thrive and to be well, and for our young people, for our city, for our communities to thrive and be well. It's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take Val, it's gonna take all of us. So you gotta say, look inside, what can I do to make a difference? What can I do? What can I pour my time, my resources, whatever that looks like, what can I do to make a difference?
Amen.
Amen.
Baby.
Join me again, thanking these folks, and I think you can tell this is complicated. But be out in the community and help people know there is such a thing as Thriving Together, that is bringing together organizations across the fields, because housing affects education, employment affects both of those, health affects both of them. So somehow the organizations that are focused in a particular area now have to connect to those working in a different area and work in a very different way. I still remember in the very early Smart Start days, one of the requirements was that we had parents of children receiving services sitting on the board, along with the heads of things like school system and the county manager and the public health department and DSS. And I watched our county manager, Graham Pavere, visibly change as he interacted with a parent that was having difficulty getting the services that they need. Because the real experience of that person, that's where the family power, Forsyth family power, begins to intersect, I think, most powerfully with the work, so that what is happening to the individual child, the individual parent, and family is being exhibited and lived out in front of those who think they have power. So this is a growing effort. Help people in the community know about Thriving Together, building a collective effort across every one of our nonprofit and public institutions trying to affect children and families in this community. So thank these folks again. First weekend, first Tuesday in March.
If you haven't signed up for our email list,